Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-minute live conversations, featuring leaders in the performance marketing world speaking about the hottest topics in this industry, are scheduled twice monthly. Before we get to today's conversation, a quick housekeeping note. We'll be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of the session today, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them and we'll try to do as many as possible in the final moments of the episode. Today's episode covers Agile development frameworks. If change is the new normal, organizations need to be more flexible and move more quickly than ever. The old ways of long product development cycles are outmoded and can be fatal. Competition is better and there are more tools than ever to get going more quickly. One technique, the Agile Framework, has been practiced for software and agencies and is making more mainstream inroads with organizations of all kinds. To discuss this, we welcome our trusty moderator and Brand Response Council Chairman, Chris Foster of Modern Postcard, and his two guests, both from Red Door Interactive, Ron Hadler, Vice President, Data and Innovation, and Candice Wyatt, Senior Director, Web and Platform Solutions Group. Welcome, team. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much for having us. And Candice and Ron, thank you so much for joining. When thinking about Agile frameworks, the reason we wanted to bring this up is over the last probably 6 months or even a year or so of the PDMI Take 20s, one constant refrain has been companies need to be agile. Things are changing. You can't plan on change. You have to plan for change. It's moving very quickly. And in fact, about a year plus ago, even before the pandemic, I was at a conference where someone from Netflix was speaking about their planning cycles, and they said even at Netflix they're not planning more than 6 months out. So if a large company like that is moving their planning cycle shorter, it has an effect on everybody. And one of the refrains we have talked about, especially with media companies and agencies and even brands, is that planning cycles need to be much shorter, right? We don't quite know what the economy is going to look like 6 months from now. And companies and brands of all types and sizes need to adjust more rapidly. And the question is, well, how do you do that? And a lot of people throw out the word agile and they say, well, we're an agile company. Oh, we have an agile approach. What does that actually mean? With us today are some experts on what is truly an agile framework. Agile framework is a process of working that helps to eliminate a lot of the stop gaps between one stage to the next of putting together large projects. Instead, it puts the people who are actually working the project in charge of the speed and the development. So we're excited to talk about this, and just so people get a level set understanding of this, in the past there was an approach called a waterfall approach for software development. The waterfall approach would have work done, and then there would be a stage gate where people would approve or disapprove or make changes, and then they move to the next, and then they move to the next. But that might take months, and in the course of that months, A, the customers might have changed, B, they might have gotten it wrong, or C, they might need to make changes, and to rewind all of that would be painful and time consuming. So instead, this agile approach has come into play, which is much more aligned with the needs of today's brands, agencies, and companies. So let's jump in. So one thing that I would ask, and I'll start with you, Ron, is what was that big transition from a waterfall approach into an agile approach of working?
Yeah, and it definitely happened at Red Door a long time ago, and it didn't just touch the development team, but it really kind of started to, and infect is probably the wrong word, but it was an infectious way of working. Because people saw the benefits of it, the ability, Agile's got this sort of like, a kind of like feel of what you can do, but it's really the ability to respond and adapt. And, that's one of the great examples of a company, especially a large company, of doing that is, this is a little bit dating me myself, but Windows, Microsoft in 1995, moving from desktop to internet. So that was really one of the biggest pivots or agile movements that anybody had seen during that time of being able to do that, of really just kind of changing the entire focus of a company. And most of the great companies that are out there now, your Facebooks, your Googles, work in an agile method and are able to kind of adapt and respond to the changing environments. And so here we have the ultimate environment sort of change in the pandemic and how we need to do, not being able to plan 6 months. And so being able to adapt and respond to the changing, environment. Inflation's coming at us, supply chains, things that we've already talked about here on the Take 20. So, really our transition was just started in development and then moved through the company because waterfall plainly wasn't working.
Right. It's interesting where it's almost as if companies in the past had a choice between an agile mindset versus a waterfall mindset, but now waterfall doesn't work, and the agile framework is now the necessary approach, and companies that don't use that risk falling behind their competitors. So Candice, you're nodding your head about a lot of this stuff. So I guess, Candice, what I would ask you as a senior development person, part of the Agile framework relies on what's called a scrum, guys. And what a scrum means is a team that huddles up, prepares for the day, and gets that day's work done. The next day they say, okay, what did we do? What are we doing? Okay, we're off. But you're not in the office anymore. You don't do stand-up meetings for 10 minutes and say, what are we working on? How are you adapting to managing scrum teams in a remote work environment?
Yeah, and really not a lot has changed on that front. Like most activities that you're doing, you're taking them from an in-person setting and you're bringing them to a virtual environment. So we're still doing those stand-ups. We're still doing those scrums if you're utilizing Scrum, where we're getting together. It's a video call at that point. It's still the same agenda. We have some virtual tools that we're using that can visualize the work that's in the backlog, the work that's in progress, the work that's completed, kind of where it's at through the QA and to that completed stage. So really, it's not changed other than we're just not physically in person. I can't tap somebody on the back and say, good job, we're in this video virtual environment.
Sure. So I'd like you to expand or go a little bit more in depth into those virtual tools. And then can you kind of explain what you're using and how that's been helpful for you?
Yeah, we at Red Door utilize Workfront, which is an enterprise project management tool. But like many of the project management tools, they've evolved. So what was once set up in a very waterfall type approach has evolved to having an agile suite of tools and things. You can have a visual kind of Kanban board, things like that. So they've really adopted this agile framework and incorporated that so that teams who are utilizing that framework or those methodologies can utilize that tool that way.
Sure. And so for the audience, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say a ping in there. You don't need tools to actually do kind of agile or scrum management. And when we first did that, we didn't. It was just essentially some big pieces of white paper with a lot of little stickies all over it. I remember traveling onto a client site, and we brought this gigantic thing with all these stickies and moving them around between where they were in the stages of development. And of course, we've evolved and using software, but you don't need to make the investment of software to employ the Agile framework.
No, I love that idea. So to unpack some of the lingo that we just threw about folks, Candice had mentioned the backlogs in progress and completed. As you can imagine, those are just stages of a project. Whether it's backlog means queued up, we know we need to do it, but we're not working on it now. The in progress is the stuff we're working on, and completed, check it off. And the goal for Agile is to take all that stuff off the backlog and move it into progress and completed. Because I guarantee you, every single one on this that's watching this call today has, man, I know I've got a list of all these things we want to do. That's your backlog, right? And so what Agile helps you do is to manage and unpack the backlog so it's more bite-sized and quote unquote manageable, right? It's limited into a specific, what they call a story, for each of those various projects that they want to do. The other thing Candice mentioned is a Kanban board. Candice, I'll give you the honors. If you could just tell folks what a Kanban board means, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's a visual representation of the work that both has been done, is in progress, and like you mentioned, queued up. And so the whole concept is, one, depending upon your team size, this will vary a bit, but you don't want to have too much in progress work. Really, if you think about multitasking, used to be seen as kind of a good quality to have. But what we found is that effectiveness, efficiency really go down the more you try and multitask. So with a Kanban board, and if you're looking at developers, you really want them to not be splitting their mind share between too many different things. You want them focused on one thing. The goal is to get that one item from in progress to completed. Then you can pull from the backlog. So whatever is highest priority next. And that is one of the things that I love about Agile is you have this backlog that is forever moving a bit, right? Because things that were once important at the beginning of the project, maybe 6 months down the line, may not be the highest priority because things are evolving. Your customers are evolving, the landscape is evolving, your product could be evolving. So that backlog is being reprioritized on a continual basis. So developer finishes something in progress, goes to completed, he's pulling the next highest priority item from the backlog to work on.
I love it. And one of the things where this plays out in the field, where the changing priorities is something we all experienced a year or so ago when the pandemic really hit and the restaurant industry, especially quick serve industry, had to change their model completely. We had a panelist from the Habit Burger, and she was talking about how they had to then suddenly, immediately create a mobile app so their customers could get curbside pickup. Right, the priorities of the developers 3 months before were very different than what happened as soon as March 2020 hit, right? They had to make that adjustment. So the idea of having a post-it notes really of these various backlog helps you reprioritize and reshuffle them. To Ron's point earlier, and while these folks are masters, I'm a dabbling practitioner. We actually had Agile Framework on a whiteboard and post-it notes, right? So you don't need the technology. You can go from move to a place where you have multiple teams doing it, managers managing it, and there are software technologies out there. Workfront is one of them, Jira is another one, Atlassian's another one. So there are other, if you type in Agile Framework software, you'll find a bazillion of them. But what you can do though is do it on a whiteboard and post-it notes and still manage that process. One thing about Agile too, and Ron, I'd like you to touch on this, is the concept of a story, right? Because whenever you have a certain need for a project or an app, there's the customer and they need something, but you know what, the business needs something too, right? And the developer might need something as well. And so oftentimes these are stories written from these various perspectives. Ron, can you give us a good example of where you had to really figure out the customer's perspective and the customer story?
Good question, and searching for something off the top of my head that'll kind of meet that. Just developing user stories is a bit of an art because it needs to communicate a lot of things to a lot of different people, right? Because you are trying to capture what a customer wants. You need to be able to speak to what the developer needs to do, and it needs to be in a language that the other folks that are part of the team can actually understand too. It can't just be all in developer speak, and understanding that. So it really needs to, state what is the business objective, and then how is the software going to meet that business objective. And it doesn't need to be completely detailed out in every little step or every requirement. Those requirements can be done afterwards, but the stories themselves need to be a complete thought to be able to kind of support the features that the business needs. And I'll throw it over to Candice. Maybe she's got a better story than my explanation.
Yeah, I got one for you, Ron, and you'll probably remember this once I start talking about it. But the thing I want to say about user stories before, what I love about them, and the formula is pretty simple, right? It's as a blank, right? Whatever user you're talking about, I can blank, what can you do? So that blank, what is the value? And I love that there is the value part of that because it really challenges you to make sure that the value is there if you're going to develop this feature, this user story, and kind of invest the time and effort in that. So the thing that came to mind was we had a client whose website heavily focused on recipes. And what we found was that we were missing, at first glance, it was like, hey, you have a recipe, you put it on there and you're done. right? But then you have, when you think about family sizes, right? You have everyone from a single person who's making a recipe to a family of 6. And so we were missing this key functionality of needing the ability to split that recipe up into, hey, proportions. Are you making it for 1 person? You making it for 4? You making it for 6? So that was a user story that we really outlined and challenged ourselves on and incorporated it into the website.
Brilliant. I love that. You know, and this is a wonderful example of why Agile is the current mode. Because if in a waterfall development, you're like, we will make a recipe function. And then it's like, oh no, we have to unwind and redo the recipe function because it's all been approved. It just is too slow. In an Agile framework, and you telling a user story of, you know, to put Candice's structure, as a developer, I can, you know, fractionalize a recipe so that it can fit a family of 1 or a family of 6, so that any person in any kitchen environment can download this recipe successfully, right? And that's that nice value at the end. It's a really terrific structure. And I think what I want to impress upon the audience is that there are, if you have not, or if you are not incorporating an Agile framework in terms of your work methodology, you're missing out on what the leading innovators are doing to help them develop things so quickly. If you think about all of the rapid innovation, even when you purchase something like on Amazon, recently they developed their subscription, right? Maybe it's not recent, but I've become aware of the subscription, right? You buy something and they actually now, from a color code perspective, highlight the prescription. You have to choose the single purchase for certain items. That is all possible because of an Agile framework environment where they say, as a business, we want them to subscribe to this product, right? And so how do we create the environment to do so? So if anyone who interacts with an app, which is everybody, is experienced the customer side of an Agile framework and an Agile work environment. I guess what I'll do is I'd like the last question that I'll throw out to both of you is just a quick story of the most successful kind of Agile Scrum project that you guys did. You don't have to mention name, but if you could describe the business. Candice, you did a great job with the recipe. Ron, do you have another example of a success?
Yeah. And I think it's good because we've been talking a lot about developers, and this is outside of the development environment. And so this was a marketing team that was just overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that they're having. And they just could not kind of get things done. Things got halfway done and they'd switch to something else, make a little progress on that back and forth. And so moving to an agile approach, being able to get everything into a backlog, grew the backlog, going, okay, here's my priorities, and then moving things one by one and then adjusting on a daily basis. Okay, something that was priority yesterday is down below this higher priority. We got to jump on this, and then able to kind of adapt to what's going on. So a marketing team was able to kind of really start working through their backlog, making a lot more progress, and they attributed it to Agile. Like they were just, you know, not able to do that without kind of going through it. Candice made the most important part about Agile is that it reflects the real world. Waterfall doesn't reflect the world. The world doesn't go, okay, let's get all this done and then go to the next step. No, the world is constantly changing, and if you don't adapt, and that is what Agile does, it reflects real world as to what goes on. You know, the world doesn't stop 9 months while you do something. It is constantly changing.
Actually, that is a wonderful pin on it, because we're all looking for work methods that actually reflect real world situations and are quote unquote more human, right? And this is the way to create that framework for it. Excellent. All right, well, we're already 20 minutes, guys. It moved quick. So Thomas, I'm going to throw the baton to you to see if we've got some questions from the audience. Audience, you have some experts here, and take advantage of the time.
Yeah, we have a few here. I'll start with this one. Based on what you guys have spoken about today, it seems that this Agile business model could theoretically reduce operating costs and increase quality and performance. I think Ron did this. Can you briefly share experiences on these fronts? So maybe Candice, you can jump in on that one.
Yeah, I think it definitely increases efficiency, which ties to operating costs. What I'll say about that though is with the shift from waterfall, there was this mentality that you set it and forget it, right? You built an app, you built a website, you built pieces of software, and you kind of got it out there. And oftentimes companies weren't touching that technology for a long time until it was time to, say, redesign it or do a big project with big feature enhancements. With Agile, while you are going to save on the operating costs from a manpower efficiency sort of thing, it does require you to place more of a continual investment and improvement focus on the products or the properties that you have as a company. So it's not just launching that app and not doing anything, right? It's about, okay, we've launched it. Now, how do we iterate on it? How do we improve on it? Which actually, you know, for those marketing folks out there who are making business cases to try and secure funds to be able to do that, Agile really lends itself to that. But oftentimes the business case for that is really in the backlog. What are the ideas that are going to generate additional revenue or meet the needs of your consumers and customers?
Love it.
To piggyback on that, just the kind of the quality thing, one of the things that I really like about Agile is that, you know, what happens is that if a bug gets discovered and it comes up, now you got to make a choice. Do I implement this new feature or do I fix this bug? And how the impact of that. And so it makes a tough you know, question back to stakeholders because they have to choose. You can't necessarily always have both. And that's a real world solution, is that, you know, we probably need to fix that bug before we can get onto this new, you know, feature, which may cause more bugs. So I think it does increase quality and it just makes things a solid product because you are releasing more frequently too. I think that's one of the things we really didn't kind of get into as far as the framework, is that you are pushing things out into the real world at a much faster pace. Smaller bites, much faster pace.
Great. Next one. As Agile frameworks are helping businesses move into the future, there also must be constant new development in the theory of Agile frameworks. In your opinions, what's next for this methodology?
You know, one of the things that I've liked about this, and it's not necessarily new, but I think it's gaining traction because this started back under the very old name of extreme programming, and now today it's really pair programming or group programming. And the idea here is that you don't just have a single person, you know, lone developer coding, cowboy coding, but you have a pair of programmers, so two eyes better than one. And so they switch out who types, who does, and they sit side by side. And you would think that that might be a waste of time, but it actually produces higher quality, better documented code than necessarily a single developer. And there's actually folks who have rooms set up where they have a single developer at the keyboard, and then they have the group of folks. They're solving a problem. They're addressing a bug that needs to be done immediately. And so they have things set up in a projection room and everything like that. And you get a lot of brain power to solve problems, and they're coding, you know, and getting things done very, very quickly. So that's really kind of where, you know, Agile is heading also.
You know, it's interesting, Ron. I love that concept, and it makes complete sense. And in some ways, remote work actually facilitates that even more than someone being in office. You can imagine being in a Zoom room with other people, sitting quote unquote side by side, but you're sharing screens, you have a lot of visual information in front of you, and if you're comfortable in that virtual environment, you don't actually have to be physically sitting next to someone who has a monitor over there. It can be in front of you and have a lot more monitors and a lot more visibility to what people are doing.
That's an awesome point, Chris, because, you know, one thing about developers is that their setup is everything, right? The way that their monitors are positioned, their keyboards, the type of keyboard. So taking them away from that gets them out of their environment. In a remote, they always have their mouse and their lighting, and everything's perfect. So yes, it's actually probably much better that everybody's on Zoom.
I love it.
Let's wedge one last one in. If a company's moving from a waterfall management system to an agile management system, what would you say the biggest risks are that they need to be coherent of?
When we made the shift from waterfall to agile, one of the things that was not just in our processes and the tools that we use and things like that, but it was almost a cultural shift that we had to make. You have to get people comfortable with change. And you have to try and do what you can to remove that fear of change, right? If you have a team that is empowered, I think that's a big one too. Often in waterfall, the project manager has a lot more influence and managerial type role than it does in Agile, where the developer, the team are really self-organized and empowered to make decisions. But it was big on making the cultural change, getting everybody comfortable with this concept that things are going to change. And we have tools, we have processes for how we handle that, and that it's okay to not be perfect all the time. Because especially when you're moving at a rapid pace, and especially in marketing, you're oftentimes having to make decisions with limited information, right? You're getting new information every single day, every single week, whether it's through user testing, through research, etc. So it was about creating a culture and creating a team that was comfortable with that. That was a really key part to us making the transition.
I think, one of the other things that's difficult for some companies is that, in a traditional waterfall, you have a, static set of requirements. Let's just say there's 50 requirements. And the idea here is that when at the end of the project, all of those requirements have been implemented. And the idea with Agile here is that you're kind of, you're adapting to how things are changing. Maybe some of those requirements are no longer valid at the end of the project, but also going back to that bug requirement. Now, mind you, maybe I have to fix the bug and that requirement doesn't get implemented in this phase of the project. Those are things that are kind of tough with waterfall, is making those tough decisions from the stakeholders, your clients who are asking you to do this work. Those are the tough things about Agile. They end up being stronger, but it's still, I want everything. And the reality is bugs exist and they take time. They're not just, disappear by accident. It takes focused time to address them. And it's better to address them than just to leave them lingering and saying they're going to get taken care of. It still takes all the same amount of time.
Well, and what I love what you just said too, Ron, is that you can't have everything, and that what Candice mentioned earlier is that Agile better reflects the real world. And in business and in life, we all know that there are constant trade-offs for everything. There's constant trade-off between home life and work life. And whenever you're spending time doing one thing, you're not spending time doing another. And that, of course, applies in the business environment and in development, and of course in life itself. So I really love it that the cultural shift, being comfortable with change and adaptation, reflecting the real world, the idea of pushing improvements faster. There's so many natural reasons as to why an Agile framework applies to any business environment and most all departments too. So folks, you got some information with Ron and Candice. There's a lot of stuff out there in the interwebs in terms of research, but really recommend that if you haven't implemented or thought about Agile in your own teams and your own environments, that 2022 is definitely the year to do it.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate the effort. Agreed. I learned a lot today, I can tell you that much, and I think it's a great conversation that we'll be able to share with the rest of our membership when we get the video up by Friday. So thank you to Candice, thank you to Ron, thank you to Chris. We really appreciate you being here and taking part. Your next opportunity to attend a live online Take 20 episode is Wednesday, February 2nd, Groundhog Day, as the Brand Response Council opens a 2-episode series on supply chain shenanigans. Please visit the PDMI.com/take-20 to check out the upcoming schedule and register to attend today. Thanks again for checking out this episode of the PDMI's Take 20. Be well. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.